When your reader first enters a poem, they don't know how to enter the poem. And you have one sentence to pitch whatever your idea is to two people to see if they would like it. When we talk, there's a semantic level and there's a syntactic level. We are going to talk about how one sentence can completely change how you view any piece of writing that you are working on, including poems. Hi.
Hi.
We're going to take today a technique from the film industry and apply it to writing and poetry. Have you ever written a screenplay or anything like that? Okay, that's perfectly fine.
I tried to write fiction though.
You tried to write fiction? Okay, well I won't put you through that trauma again. Fiction is super hard for me to write. I don't know if you had that experience too.
It was very hard.
Yeah. So we're not going to touch that, but we are going to talk about something that is really important when you're trying to conceive, for instance, like a screenplay, but also I think it's helpful when you're trying to think about how you're presenting any idea to anyone. And I think that this can also be applied to poems as well, because sometimes we're not really asking ourselves, what's our poem doing? What's the central tension? What's really the takeaway from this poem that makes it unique and separates it from everything else? So we're going to be trying to talk about that today. We're going to be talking about a concept called a logline. Have you ever heard of a logline before?
No, I don't know what that is.
Okay, so let's see if we can give a quick example and then kind of devise our own definition of sorts. And again, we're going to be playing a lot with like film, but so we're going to be taking some notes. These papers you have in front of you are from a book called Save the Cat, which is a book talking about story, specifically story for film, but there's lots of elements that, again, I think can apply to writing in general that I think would be really helpful. And here's an example of a logline. So there's this movie called Four Christmases that they use in the book. And the logline for that movie is, a newly married couple must spend Christmas Day at each of their 4 divorced parents' homes. That's an example of a logline. Another example that they give here, a just hired employee goes on a company weekend and soon discovers someone's trying to kill him. Nice. I feel like, well, actually, let me even hold that thought. So if you had to, just kind of hearing that, if you had to summarize what you think a log line is, what kind of summary for a log line would you give?
Sounds like a one-sentence summary of the movie or the screenplay.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. So it's like imagine you have one sentence to pitch whatever your idea is to two people to see if they would like it. That's kind of the idea. And I think this concept in general, and we'll dive into some techniques to make that sharper and more beneficial to our own writing, but we're constantly presenting ideas to people. Whether it's a poem we're writing, a chapbook we're writing, a manuscript you're writing, having an idea of what is that kind of central thought and being able to express that, I think is really helpful, because I think a lot of us, when we write poems and then we finish the poem, if someone asks us, oh, what's your poem about? It could be a hard question, right? Because we end up being like, well, it mentions this, and we don't even think about kind of the central relationship very often. And I think that is a mistake for writing that we're taking to a higher level. If you're just writing for yourself, I think that's one thing. But if you're writing with an audience that is beyond yourself, then I think these are questions that we really want to be considering, because it's no longer about you. And it's the same, whether it's a movie, whether it's a product, whether it's a piece of art, we need to be able to kind of pitch that to people. So there's a couple of different aspects of log lines that I want to touch on. Obviously, we're not going to have time today to read all of this. I would encourage you to check out the book if you find this interesting. But we're just going to kind of highlight some key moments behind log lines I want to identify for you that I think are going to be key when we're trying to write our own. I stapled these horribly and I printed them wrong, so I apologize. So we're going to take a look at page 2, okay? Which is going to say, there's going to be a paragraph that says, "Isn't it ironic?" Got it? Great. Okay. What's irony?
Yeah, I think it's when you say something but you actually mean the opposite.
Can you give me an example? I hate to put you on the spot.
Okay, like for example, if someone asks you how you're doing, and you say, "I'm doing great," but then in reality you're saying it with such a tone that you actually mean the opposite.
Wow, that's a really great. I talk about that a lot. So I teach pronunciation, and one of the things we talk about a lot with communication is when we talk, there's a semantic level and there's a syntactic level. And so the syntax is like your grammar, your vocab, your word choices, and then your semantics is the meaning. And so this is where sarcasm comes in, because sarcasm is where your syntax and your semantics disalign. Versus in general, when we communicate, we want them to line up. And that's where misunderstandings can happen, where your syntax says something and your semantics says another thing. That's where people get confused if it's not done intentionally. So we have to always kind of watch out for that. I think of irony too, just kind of backtrack a little bit, as like something, an unexpected result from an expected situation, and that tension that comes up. Like for instance, like driving home from the hospital and then getting hit by a car and going back to the hospital. Like that's like you're leaving the hospital, now you have to go back. Like that's where, or if you watch a lot of Twilight Zone episodes are based all around irony, right? The episode that comes to mind for me is the librarian dude. He's the last human on Earth, and like he finds this huge library at the end and he just loves it, but then his glasses break and he can't see. So like that sort of tension and that irony. So it creates immediate tension. Because if you had to define a story, how would you define a story?
That has irony?
Just in general.
I usually, okay, what type of story? You mean like super short?
Just any story.
Okay.
How does something become not a story versus a story? What's the separation?
Well, there's good stories and there's stories that are boring.
Okay, we can talk more on that then. So what makes a boring story versus a good, quote unquote, good story?
Yeah, a boring story is something like a TV show where you can actually predict almost everything that happens, and it's just very somewhat cliche.
Okay, let's dive a little bit deeper, because I think this is also going to tie back to log lines as well. These are concepts we want to be thinking about. So like a comedy where it's just like everything is almost predictable, plus you have like people laughing, a laugh track that tells you where to laugh, and in reality when you listen to it, it's not really that humorous. I mean, that can be kind of ironic too. I mean, that's
Yeah.
You can see, like, sometimes you see that in dark comedies, like they'll add laugh tracks to moments that actually aren't very funny, and it's just like that tension as well. I think, well, let's talk more on that point. So a bad story you mentioned is kind of predictable and it's cliche. What's the problem with being predictable and cliche? Who cares? Why is that a problem?
If you want something that's higher quality, then having something that's not expected, makes it much more exciting.
Okay, so there's this aspect of surprise and excitement that's coming in. Okay, so I think this gets back to a concept of, a word we already used a bit today, it's tension. Stories have to have tension. There has to be conflict. Mm-hmm. There has to be. If there's no conflict, there's no story. There has to be some sort of issue to be resolved. Mm-hmm. And so I think, going back to what you mentioned about predictability and cliche, I think that the issue that comes up is there's no conflict because you already know what the resolution is.
Yeah. Right. It's kind of like, for example, a lot of people say that, I shouldn't say this, but they say that Jimmy Fallon is boring because he laughs at everything and he thinks everything's hilarious and funny, like the best joke he's ever heard. So some people say he's fake, but that's almost because it's predictable. They know he's just going to laugh and do all that. But if he were to be a little bit more authentic and sometimes laugh very hard, if it really deserves that, merits it, and then sometimes not laugh as hard or just keep, mix it up a bit. That way it seems more authentic and, he's not as predictable.
Mm-hmm. So moving away from predictability and we talked about this when we're delivering poems on stage. You were at that workshop. In our own writing, we have to move away from the things that people are going to expect us to do, or expect us to say, or expect us to act. And the more we're able to do that, but still be in a way that's logical and fits in the world we're building, the better. Talking about log lines, how can we apply this to log lines? And then bigger picture, how can we apply this to our poems? Irony is one device that we can turn to. I think most poems that really resonate with us when we read them have some degree of irony to them, even if it's just a small amount. So I was thinking about the story, or the movie Toy Story. If you had to give a log line for Toy Story, have you seen the first Toy Story?
I'm trying to think hard. I'm mixing it up with the other ones, but yeah.
They all kind of run together. That's fair. So I was kind of thinking about this, and I was like, what's the irony in Toy Story? And if I had to write a log line for Toy Story, emphasizing the irony, what would it be? So this is what I came up with. So Woody, the main toy character, has to befriend the toy that he's jealous of in order to return to his owner. Okay, so the irony, in my opinion, is that tension where it's like, I don't like this person, but I need to befriend them in order to reunite and be in a better relationship. That's irony, and it's something that, notice it's not something that resolves immediately. It takes a long time, because it's like you have to establish the fact that, I'm jealous of this person. Then you have to develop the interactions between them, because it's not like you just automatically lose that jealousy, right? You have to work at it and get to know the person, and then over time, so it's something that takes pretty much the entire movie to resolve. Questions for me about irony?
Yeah, I think I get it. It's kind of like the poem that I wrote, Mahjong, where at the end my mother ends up beating her mother, right, in Mahjong. That's kind of irony, right? Because it's all about my grandmother winning at first, and then at the very end, it's really my mother who wins.
So if I had to kind of summarize that again, so like the experienced Mahjong player loses to her novitiate daughter, right? And that plays on all different kinds of relationships, right? Mother-daughter dynamics, then with the game, like player versus player dynamics, all kinds of things. Because you lose a layer, right? If it's just beginner Mahjong player beats expert Mahjong player, I mean, that is a story too, right? But then when you add in the mother-daughter dynamic, it's just like, oh my God, like it's just layers. We want to complicate. Okay. Everything we talk about today, yes, we're talking about poetry, we're talking about writing, but this is anytime we talk.
Okay, because I noticed that when some people seem to be funny, a lot of times what they're using irony.
100%.
And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll speak, kind of mutter to the side under their breath, and that's what's ironic.
Yeah, 100%. It's used all the time. Comedy and writing have so many similarities to them. There's a comedian in town, Leslie Battle, if you ever could talk with her. That's all we talk about, just the similarities between poetry and comedy. In comedy, it's central. If you're someone who likes sarcasm or dark humor, it's essential. It's probably the most common device used. The next thing I want to talk about is on the same page, and then carrying over the next page, is we get this idea of a compelling mental picture. So when we get a log line, we really want to be able to enter into that world. Okay, so like for instance, to use the log line that we had earlier, like a newly married couple must spend Christmas Day at each of their 4 divorced parents' homes. Okay. What do you think is like, what's the word that stands out to you in that log line? Like a newly married couple must spend the Christmas Day at each of their 4 divorced parents' homes.
What do I think about that?
Is there a word in there? Like if you had to pick one word that you think is doing the most work there, what word do you think is doing the most work?
Must spend.
Okay, must. Must is a good one. Out of order.
What else? 4 divorced parents.
If you only had to pick one of those words.
Divorced.
Divorce. That's the word that stands out to me.
Yeah.
Okay. You can make arguments for lots of other words too, but the word that stands out to me is divorce, because divorce automatically implies tension. It automatically implies our tension was, it's an unresolved tension, right? You couldn't even solve it, so it's still in the air. It hasn't actually left, right? It's still there. And obviously the irony of that too is you have the newly married versus the going to the divorced, couples and things like that. That creates a whole picture. You can literally see them being like, all right, we got to go to the next person's house. Like, oh, you can see them starting at like 8 a.m. Then like every couple of hours, all right, we got to go to the, like, you can just imagine. You can imagine anticipation before it. Like, oh my gosh, Christmas is next week. Oh my God. Like you can see that. You can see them at the beginning of the day versus at the end of the day when like they're probably looking all haggard and stuff like that. Just like, let's just go. Like you can see all that just from the log line.
Yeah.
Just from that.
Right. And the fact that it's 4 divorced parents, 2 would be like crazy enough.
Right.
The 4
right.
sounds really crazy.
Yeah. So now you're not just doing it from your own one side, but you're also doing it from your partner's side. And so it's like, there's times where you have more agency versus times where you're just like a passenger, just like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. This isn't my family. Like, it's a lot. So that's another thing that we want to be considering if we are looking at our own poems and describing them to someone. What's the mental image that we're giving them? Okay. The Toy Story one example. So again, like the toy cowboy Woody has to befriend the new space astronaut toy he's jealous of in order to reunite with his owner. You get the juxtaposition of like the cowboy western versus the space. You get the juxtaposition of like jealousy and like in what would cause that. Like there's a lot of the mental image stuff. Okay. So we want to be thinking about what's also the image that we're creating. Let's think of another movie and give you a chance to kind of think of a log line, thinking about the scene setting. Have you seen The Matrix? Okay. If you had to create a log line for The Matrix, what would you say?
Okay. Trying to think, because
For
I saw
sure.
both of them. I saw Matrix and Matrix 2, right?
You can join things together, whatever works for your memory. Because they're all operating on a similar premise, right? In terms of...
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to remember exactly what happened. I just know that...
let's maybe work with that. What do you know?
I just remember he was in there, and I just remember that there was something about them, like, sitting there in the chair, but then somehow they went back in their mind, I think. But I might be confusing this with another movie.
I want to start a new show called Debbie Summarizes Films.
I can't remember.
Okay, that's fine.
Give me a hint.
No, let's work. Is there any movie that you've seen more recently? I know these are kind of older ones.
Okay, there's one I really like.
Okay, what do we got?
La La Land. That's one.
Okay, I have not seen it, so give me the one. If you had to give it a one-line log line, what are we going to say? Because I have not seen it, so you're pitching it to me.
Okay. It's about this aspiring actress who's going to a lot of auditions, and she's trying to win a role in a film or a commercial or anything.
But
she's relatively unsuccessful.
Until
until she gets her great break.
Because
her ex-boyfriend, or at least the boyfriend she broke up with, Ryan Gosling, which is not really him, but his character,
right.
basically got her to go to the audition, and she tells her story. They just told her to start telling her story, and it came from a one-woman show that she had where no one really showed up except for maybe a few of her friends and one producer that liked it. And that's the break that she had. Then she became a really big star when she got selected.
Is that how the movie ends?
It twists back because she ends up getting married, having a child, never being with him because they both go to pursue their dreams. So he wants to have, he's a jazz pianist, he wants to have his own jazz club.
Mm-hmm.
And then she goes on to pursue being an actress. But then at the end, she goes back to LA with her husband from France, I believe. And they end up going into his jazz bar, I guess, or lounge that he had. And then what's really great about the film is then they both have a flashback as to how their life would have been if they would have gotten married and had a child and had a life together. Like they had a little quick, and that's where the thing really goes. It goes all the way back, and then they end up back down, and it shows her sitting back down, listening to someone else playing with him next to her, and then it switches back to her with her husband. And then she says she's ready to leave, and then there's one last fleeting glance where she looks back at him. They never really speak, and she goes on with her life. And so it's very, very sad.
Gotcha. The person she marries is not Ryan Gosling. No. Okay.
No.
Okay. So you gave me a lot there. Ideally, again, a log line would be a single line, so we'd want to try to condense that. And it's going to be hard for me because, again, I haven't seen the movie, but basically it sounds to me like aspiring actress, achieves her professional dreams thanks to her ex-boyfriend at the cost of her
True love.
At the cost of relationships.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the irony for me is that reliance on the people you love to achieve professionally, but not emotionally. So something like that. Okay. Do you see again kind of the irony of it a little bit? But then we also get the world building of it too. Okay. So thinking back to our poems, if we create a log line for our poem, let's imagine you write a poem, and at the end of your poem, you're like, I'm going to write a log line for this poem. These are the types of things we want to be thinking about: the world building, the irony, the relationships between it. Things like that. Questions for me so far?
Yeah, world building, irony, and
one other thing, and unfortunately I didn't include a ton on it. And again, I encourage you to kind of read through this afterwards because we're kind of doing a very abbreviated glance. The last part is the title. Okay, so the log line comes from a movie, right? So, for instance, one example that they give in the book is they look at the movie Legally Blonde.
Yeah.
Okay, and then okay. I have not seen that one, so I would be relying on you. But compare other possible titles that it could have been, right?
Yeah.
And so, Legally Blonde is playing. There's some wordplay going on a little bit, right? So like legally bringing in the profession with the law, but then the blonde bringing in the aspect of kind of negative stereotypes and associations, and that sort of dichotomy, something professional versus something that's viewed as a lot of times not taken very seriously, so that sort of tension. So when we're thinking about our titles, we want to be thinking about how can our titles kind of call back to some of the central tensions in the world building that we create? Because sometimes when your reader first enters a poem, they don't know how to enter the poem. It's a new world for them. Every poem is its own separate world. There's the metaphor, I forget who said it, but the idea that every time you step into a poem, it's like stepping into a boat that you've never been in before, and you're like, I don't know if this boat's going to sink. I don't know if this is going to like carry me downstream. I don't know how long it's going to, hold up for. Every poem's like that. So when we're thinking about our titles, we want to be thinking about how can our titles kind of call back to some of the central tensions in the world building that we create? Because sometimes when your reader first enters a poem, they don't know how to enter the poem. It's a new world for them. Every poem is its own separate world. There's the metaphor, I forget who said it, but the idea that every time you step into a poem, it's like stepping into a boat that you've never been in before, and you're like, I don't know if this boat's going to sink. I don't know if this is going to like carry me downstream. I don't know how long it's going to, hold up for. Every poem's like that. And so the title is the first opportunity to establish a moment of comfort and to give some direction to your reader. So we want to spend some time on them because they can be really valuable moments. So titles are not something to push to the side or just do it in like a second. They're things to spend legitimate time sitting down, concentrating, being like, this is the frame I want my person to enter. I think one of the things we talked about before was framing, where it's like the difference. You invite someone to a party and they say, I can't come. And there's a lot of very valid ways to respond to that. You can respond very upset, be like, why didn't I invited them? You know, that was a gesture of vulnerability and they can't come. So like a lot of times the way you're going to feel that is very negative. But the person instead is like, oh, like I'm flying abroad the day before. I'm literally not going to be in the country. If it's like, oh, I have a family member who's sick. You know, that changes the whole response. I don't feel as bad that you can't come anymore. So the title's the frame.
Okay. Yeah, I agree.
And the last thing is if you feel like you have a tension in your poem that isn't immediately visible, but you want to highlight, the title can be the place to kind of guide people to that.
Okay.
One of the examples I give a lot is like, if you think about haikus don't usually have title, but let's imagine like you have a short poem that says like a kettle, like singing on the stove, you know? Mm-hmm. And let's imagine you had a title for that, and the title was like After the Breakup. Mm. Okay. Versus same poem, but the title was The First Time I Met You. Hmm. Whole different vibe, whole different world.
Yeah.
We don't want to forget titles. Titles are important moments. You're also, I know you're thinking about submissions and things like that. The title's the first thing the editors are going to see. They're going to see it in your cover letter. They're going to see what you title your work.